I woke up at 5:45 inches the morning, just when the rain started pounding harder against my small third-floor apartment window. That sound has always been my companion in Portland, like a natural clock that never fails in winter. I stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, listening to the constant tapping, until I finally forced myself to get up. I turned on the dim kitchen light and started the old coffee pot I've had for years. The same one I've fixed myself every December, because they don't even sell the parts anymore. The smell of coffee was starting to fill the room when I sat at the table to review the tax ledgers for my small clients. This work, modest as it is, has been how I've kept busy for the last 12 years. First, I checked the books for the local bakery at the end of the street, then the accounts for the guy who runs the auto shop, the one who always promises to bring me the invoices tomorrow but never remembers. After that, the ledger for the elderly couple who sell crafts at the weekend market. It was all part of my routine, something so familiar I could almost do it without thinking. As I wrote down a number, I heard my neighbor's footsteps crossing the hall, the bark of the dog from the floor below, and the distant whistle of a train passing on the tracks behind the neighborhood. Everything sounded exactly the same as it had any other morning for the last 12 years, until my phone vibrated. It was on the kitchen table. The screen showed an unknown number from Seattle. I stared at it for a few seconds, hesitating to answer. At this point in my life, unknown numbers never bring good news. Still, I picked up the phone and answered. "Mr. George Whitmore?" a female voice said. "Firm but measured. This is attorney Linda Hopkins from Turner and Morris." I stood still, holding the phone, my hands slightly tense. She continued, "I regret to inform you that Mr. Michael Turner passed away last night from cancer complications." I felt the entire kitchen suddenly go silent. The coffee pot continued to drip behind me, but for a moment I heard nothing else. "You are on the list of individuals who must attend the reading of the will," the lawyer added. "It will be tomorrow, at 2 in the afternoon, at the Turner Construction Headquarters, 21st floor." I didn't say anything. I just took a deep breath and asked her to please send me the details by email. She said she would, and hung up. I left the phone on the table. I don't know how long I stood there just watching the steam rise from my coffee cup. Something in the air had changed. After so many years of living almost on autopilot, that call stirred something deep inside me. Something I thought was already dead. I opened my email. There it was, the formal invitation. The time, the exact address, the instructions for accessing the building. I closed the email with a slow click. I went to the closet and opened the door. On one side, hanging for years, was my old suit. The same suit I wore the day I was released. I touched the fabric, noticed the wear on one of the sleeves, and tried to brush the dust off with my hand. Then I got out the rag to polish my black shoes, the only formal shoes I own. Later I called Sarah Miller, the owner of the small shop where I work part-time. When she heard my voice, she immediately asked, "Is everything okay, George?" I could only answer, "It's a matter from the past. I have to go to Seattle." She didn't press. She just told me to take care. I went out to the corner grocery store to buy a few necessities, shaving cream, a new handkerchief, a small bottle of water. At the nearby gas station, I asked about bus tickets to Seattle. The cashier showed me the schedule on a laminated sheet. The first bus left at 6 in the morning. I nodded. That was the one I would take. I went back home and packed a small bag. The suit, my ID, my old tablet, an envelope with the most important papers of my life, the ones I've carried for 12 years as if they were part of my skin. In the afternoon, I bought fresh bread and some fruit at the local market. I wanted to have something for the trip. When I returned, the rain had gotten heavier. I placed my jacket near the window to dry a little. I checked my email again. There was an automatic reminder from the law firm. I sat down to organize my clients' ledgers so there would be no pending issues for the next day. I don't like to keep them waiting. Most of them trust me because I am punctual and honest. Maybe that's the only thing I was able to remain after the storm of my life. Before going to bed, I set the alarm for 4:50. Regardless of what happened tomorrow, I needed to be on time. Then I hung the suit on the door, making sure there were no visible wrinkles. The apartment was dark except for the streetlight coming in through the window, reflecting on the worn floor. I lay down slowly, listening to the rain. That sound had always been with me. But tonight, that sound carried a different weight. I closed my eyes, not knowing that this call, so simple and so brief, was about to open another door in my life, one I believed was locked forever. The alarm went off at 4:50 a.m. I turned it off almost immediately, as if I didn't want to wake anyone, even though I've lived alone for years. I turned on the bathroom light, and the cold floor made me shiver slightly. I turned on the shower and let the hot water run while I looked at myself in the fogged-up mirror. I looked older than I remembered, maybe because of the difficult night, or maybe because of everything I've been dragging with me for over a decade. I shaved calmly, going over each movement as if it were a ritual I needed to get right. I used the same cheap aftershave I always use, the one that leaves a faint, minty smell. Then I combed my hair with the old plastic comb I've kept since before I went to prison. It's strange, but that simple comb has followed me, a strange reminder that there was a different time. I went back to the room and put on the white shirt I had ironed the night before. The fabric was cold to the touch. Then I tied my dark blue tie, the one I only use for days that seem important or dangerous. I adjusted the knot several times until it was straight. I checked my bag. Suit, documents, the envelope with my most sensitive papers, my old tablet, and a bottle of water. I closed the apartment door carefully, as if I didn't want the building to know I was leaving. It was still completely dark outside, and a thick fog covered the street leading to the bus station. The streetlights looked like yellow blurs lost in the mist. I arrived at the station at 5:35. There were about 5 or 6 people waiting, 2 workers with hard hats hanging from their arms, an elderly woman clutching her purse, a young man with a backpack staring endlessly at his phone. Nobody was talking. The air smelled like wet asphalt. I stood under the metal roof, listening to the constant dripping from the edges. The bus arrived on time, at 5:55. The driver checked the tickets, stored the large bags in the lower compartment, and told us to board. I sat by the window. I wanted a clear view of the road, maybe just to keep my mind busy. At 6 o'clock sharp, the bus pulled away. The lights of Portland slowly faded, distorted by the rain on the glass. I felt a knot in my chest. It was the first time in 12 years that I had left the city for something that wasn't strictly necessary. This time, I was heading toward a part of my past I had always tried to leave behind. I looked around. A young mother was trying to calm her baby, who was crying softly, patting his back with tired movements. A student was asleep, with his head resting on his backpack, and 2 people were working on their laptops, as if it were just another Monday. The driver put on some soft music that I could barely hear. I checked my watch. About 4.5 hours to Seattle. I settled into my seat and tried to keep my eyes fixed on the passing landscape. But my mind kept going back, again and again, to the lawyer's call. 12 years is enough time for everything to change. But it's also enough time for nothing to really change in a heart that has been broken. The bus made its first stop in Eugene around 7:30. Some passengers got off to buy coffee or stretch their legs. I got off too. The cold air hit me as I stepped out. I bought a hot black coffee and leaned against a railing, watching the steam rise from the cup. For a moment I thought about going back to Portland, just turning around and abandoning this trip. But I couldn't. Something inside me knew I couldn't keep hiding from the past. We got back on. The bus continued driving on highways surrounded by tall trees. The fog began to clear as the timid morning sun tried to break through the clouds. The sky turned a light gray color that made everything seem cleaner. I stared out the window for long minutes, watching the trees pass by, one after another, like pages of an old book. At 9:25 I received a message from Sarah. "Travel safe, George. Let me know when you arrive." I smiled for the first time that morning. Those small gestures of concern, as simple as they are, they mean more than people realize. Around 10:45, the first towers of Seattle began to appear in the distance. The traffic got heavier. The bus slowed down as it entered the city. Wide streets, cars passing quickly, skyscrapers reflecting the dull sky. Recognizing the city after so many years gave me a strange feeling, as if my memories didn't know whether to wake up or stay asleep. We finally arrived at the central station. I got off with my bag on my shoulder. The place was louder and more modern than I remembered. I found the public restrooms, and there in front of the mirror above a metal sink, I adjusted my tie and fixed my hair again. I felt a slight tremor in my hands. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe not. I went outside and ordered a cab using the app on my phone. The car arrived a few minutes later. The driver, a man in his 50s, greeted me kindly and asked if it was my first time in the city. I told him no, but that it had been a long time. The ride to the hotel was short. The streets were damp, the traffic lights reflecting on the pavement like red and green smudges. At the hotel, the receptionist, a young woman with thick glasses, asked for my ID. I hesitated for a second before handing it to her. In Portland, I rarely use it. It feels like a piece of paper that carries a shadow I don't always want to show. But here I had no choice. She typed in my information, smiled, and gave me the key to room 211. I entered the room. It smelled like old heating and detergent. I put the suit on a hanger and left it hanging to straighten out. I turned on the heat and sat on the edge of the bed. I took the invitation to the will, reading out of my wallet. I read it several times, as if looking for a hidden message among such cold letters. I decided to go for a walk before lunch. I bought a simple sandwich and a bottle of water at a nearby store. I sat on a bench facing a small park. Fallen leaves piled up at the edges of the paths. Several people walked by hurried, oblivious to my small internal whirlwind. I went back to the hotel before one. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and fixed my shirt collar. I brushed the shoulders of the suit and buttoned it. I took several deep breaths before grabbing my bag. I ordered another cab and gave the address for the Turner Construction Building. As we got closer, the green glass tower rose above the rest, imposing, elegant, intimidating. The driver dropped me off right in front of the entrance. I got out of the cab, adjusted my tie one more time, and looked up at the building. It was bigger than I remembered. Colder, too. I went through the revolving doors and entered the lobby. There was a smell of polished wood and fresh coffee. The floor shone as if it had just been cleaned. The receptionists wore immaculate uniforms. I approached the desk. "I'm George Whitmore," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I'm here for the will reading." The receptionist checked a list on a tablet and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Please take elevator number 3 to the 21st floor." I nodded gratefully and walked towards the elevators. My heart started beating a little faster. I entered the empty elevator, the doors closing softly. Instrumental music played at a low volume. I looked at my reflection in the metal doors and gripped the straps of my bag with both hands. It was the first time, after 12 long years, that I was going to face my daughter and my past, head on. The bell chimed. Floor 21. The doors opened, and that's where it all began. When the elevator doors opened on the 21st floor, the first thing I saw was a long hallway covered in a soft gray carpet. The yellow ceiling lights gave off a warm glow. That contrasted with the cold I felt in my chest. Both sides of the hallway were lined with framed pictures. Old photographs of Turner Construction, buildings in black and white, bridges under construction, portraits of staff from decades ago. I felt like every step I took brought me closer to a past I had fled from for so many years. A young man with an ID card that said Kevin approached me with a polite smile. "Mr. Whitmore, do you need help finding the room?" I nodded, not trusting myself to open my mouth. I felt my voice might break. Kevin guided me down a hallway where the offices had glass walls. Through them I saw employees dressed in formal attire, typing on keyboards, reviewing blueprints, meeting around tables full of papers. Everything seemed to be moving fast, as if I were re-entering a world I had been cast out of years ago. Finally, we reached a set of double wooden doors with a small sign. Private, state bidding incision. Kevin opened the door for me. My heart pounded harder the moment I crossed the threshold. Inside, there were maybe 12 or 15 people sitting around a long, polished table. Some were talking in low voices, others were reviewing documents. But as soon as I entered, several faces turned towards me. Looks that mixed curiosity, discomfort, and a kind of coldness I recognized instantly. It was the kind of look people give when they don't know whether to respect you or fear you. The first person I saw was Hassan Carter. He was near the window, arms crossed, talking to a man in a blue suit, when he heard the door and turned his head toward me. It didn't take him a second to form a look of pure contempt. He looked me up and down, as if I didn't belong there, as if my mere presence was an offense. Then I saw Emily, my daughter. She was sitting near the end of the table. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and she wore an immaculate beige suit. Her eyes met mine for just an instant. I saw surprise, or maybe pain, but she looked away immediately, her jaw tightening, as if looking at me for one more second was too difficult. I walked slowly towards one of the chairs at the back, trying not to make a sound on the carpet, even though inside every step felt like a hammer blow. I left my bag by my feet and took a deep breath. An older woman sitting nearby whispered to the person next to her, "Who is that man?" The other person shrugged. Some distant relative, I suppose. I avoided reacting. At this point, comments like that didn't surprise me. An employee entered with a tray full of coffee, tea, and glasses of water. She stopped by my side and offered me one, but I shook my head. I didn't want them to see my hand tremble if I picked up a cup. Just 2 minutes passed before the door opened, and the lawyer, Linda Hopkins, appeared. She wore a sober black suit, and behind her 2 assistants pushed a cart with a box of documents and a large sealed envelope. The murmur in the room slowly died down. Linda began to read the names of those present, checking the list one by one. When she said, "George Whitmore," there was a slight shift in the room. Someone turned in their chair. Others looked up with open surprise. One person let out a small, almost inaudible, "What?" Hassan spoke before Linda could continue. "I thought that man wasn't supposed to be here." He pointed at me without any respect, like I was an intruder. Linda remained firm. "Mr. Whitmore is on the wills list. He must be present." Hassan snorted, a short, arrogant laugh. He leaned towards Emily and muttered, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this." Emily didn't respond. She just gripped the edge of her chair, as if it was the only thing keeping her stable. Linda asked for silence and gave clear instructions for everyone to turn off their phones. One of her assistants locked the door from the inside, which surprised me, but I understood. Privacy was absolute. The lawyer opened the large envelope and took out a set of pages bound in a blue folder. The assistants placed other documents on the table. Before reading the will, Linda explained that Michael Turner had left a personal statement that must be read first. There was no conversation now. Everyone sat up straighter in their chairs. Hassan started twirling a pen with obvious impatience. Emily looked down at her hands, which were trembling slightly. Linda took a deep breath and opened the first page. "I carry a truth with me that I never spoke," she began. The sentence hung in the room like a soft but precise blow. The murmurs died instantly. I felt the air grow heavier. I sat so still I barely blinked. Linda continued reading in a firm voice. When she reached the paragraph that said, "George Whitmore did not divert a single dollar. The man who orchestrated everything was Hassan Carter." The room exploded. There were gasps, chairs scraping. Someone dropped a glass. The woman in the back let out a stifled cry. The man in the blue suit stared at Hassan, his mouth open. Hassan slammed his fist on the table. "That's a lie!" Michael was sick. "He didn't know what he was saying." Linda raised a hand for silence. "Everything mentioned here is supported by attached documents. Please, let me continue." I felt the stares landing on me, as if the air itself had become dense. Glances that were no longer loaded with contempt, but with bewilderment and even shame, as if they all remembered how they had judged me. Emily still wouldn't look at me, but I could see her back tensing, the muscles in her neck seeming to hold an enormous weight. Linda continued reading, describing details that felt like silent knives. Bank transfers, internal emails, password changes that coincided with key dates. Linda's voice was calm, but every word sank heavily into the room. While she read, I said nothing. I didn't move a finger. I felt that if I reacted, I would break something in that moment. Something fragile. Something deep. And as I heard every sentence reveal the silent, years-long betrayal, the only thing I could think about was Emily, the little girl I had raised, now sitting just a few feet away, trembling, not daring to look up at me. The storm was just beginning. Linda turned to the second page without changing her tone, as if she were used to bearing the weight of truths that could shatter an entire room. Hassan Carter transferred money to his personal account using George's as a front. I heard that name, mine, in the middle of the sentence, and I felt a dry pang in my chest. It wasn't surprise, not after what Linda had read before, but hearing it like that, so clearly, so directly, it took my breath away for a second. A man with glasses. I vaguely recognized his face. The former accounting director turned to me. His eyes were red, like someone who just discovered they'd been living a lie for years. I didn't know any of this," he managed to say. His voice trembled in a way I didn't expect from a man in his position. Linda opened a metal box and took out a stack of documents held with paperclips. She held them up for everyone to see. "Here are the bank statements, the emails sent by Hassan to his team, and the private audit report Mr. Turner secretly commissioned." A murmur spread through the room like a cold wind. Some leaned forward, others were paralyzed, unable to look away from the documents. Hassan reacted like a sprung coil. He lunged toward the table with his hand outstretched, trying to snatch the papers from Linda. "Give me those! This is a setup!" But one of the lawyer's assistants quickly stepped in, blocking him with his forearm. Hassan stepped back, furious, breathing heavily. Emily, sitting just feet away, murmured in a broken voice, "Hassan, say something, please." She was looking at him as if she was still searching for a sign, an explanation. Anything that could make this nightmare unreal. Hassan turned to her, his expression shifting from rage to desperation in seconds. "Don't listen to her. Michael hated me. This is a conspiracy against me." He said it so loudly that several people flinched. Linda didn't lose control. She opened another folder and continued reading. "I discovered the truth when George was convicted. I kept quiet because I feared the company would collapse, and because I didn't want Emily to suffer." A heavy silence fell over the room. I could see several employees exchanging stunned glances. A woman at the other end asked, "Mr. Turner knew from the beginning? Since the trial?" Linda held up a sealed envelope. She opened it slowly and took out a small, transparent USB drive with a handwritten label. "It's here," she said. "The recording where Michael confesses the truth to a colleague, 3 months before he died." She placed it on the table. The sound it made was almost symbolic, like a gavel striking a verdict. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Hassan. There was no more doubt, no benefit of the doubt. They looked at him with repulsion, with shock, with something that resembled fear. Hassan backed away until his back hit the wall. His hands were shaking. I just breathed. I couldn't move. If I did, I felt something inside me would break. Linda continued reading the final part of the statement, her voice cracking for just an instant. "And I let George take the blame, believing he was strong enough. It was the worst mistake of my life. I lowered my head. I didn't know where to look. The room became so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning above us. I had waited 12 years to hear something like this. But I didn't know how a man was supposed to react to words that come so late." Someone sobbed. A young employee covered her mouth with both hands. Another person dropped a folder. Emily lifted her head for the first time since the reading began. Her eyes were full of unshed tears. She was biting her lip, trying not to break completely. When our eyes met, it was only for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Linda took a sip of water, breathed deeply, and continued. Hassan manipulated Emily into believing her father had betrayed the family. Emily turned to Hassan, tears finally falling, a thin stream down her cheeks. "This whole time, you lied to me?" she asked, her voice shattered. Hassan couldn't meet her gaze. He turned to Linda as if that could shield him from the judgment of his own wife. "I won't say anything without my lawyer," he growled. "I want everyone to know that." Linda nodded once. "That is your right. But the reading will continue." She turned to the next page. The atmosphere changed instantly. The tension turned to anticipation. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. Then Linda began the section on the distribution of assets. "All assets, properties, and shares valued at approximately $185 million will be given to George Whitmore." I don't know how to describe that moment. It was as if the air was sucked out of the room. A few seconds of complete silence, followed by an explosion of murmurs. "Whitmore? Did I hear that right?" "It can't be!" Hassan screamed. "That's impossible!" Emily put a hand to her chest, completely pale, as if her heart had stopped for a moment. Linda kept reading, without stopping. Emily Whitmore will receive $25. $1 for every year she allowed others to keep her from her father. Emily broke down, sobbing openly. She reached for a tissue, but her hands were shaking too much to hold it. Several people, even those who didn't know me, looked away out of respect. Or perhaps second-hand shame. Hassan, beside himself, demanded, "And me? What about me?" Linda looked at him directly, without flinching. "You will receive nothing." The entire room fell into absolute silence, a silence that weighed as much as the words that had just been spoken. Linda closed the folder and announced, "Mr. Turner requested that Hassan Carter immediately leave the room." 2 guards entered. Hassan started to protest, to curse, but he had no choice. As they led him to the door, he pointed a trembling finger at me. "This isn't over, Whitmore. You'll pay for this." The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound echoed like a final chapter I hadn't asked for but had arrived nonetheless. Emily collapsed onto the table, covering her face with both hands. No one moved to touch her, maybe because they didn't know if she wanted comfort, or because the truth that had just fallen on her was too personal. Linda began to gather the papers in silence. In a few minutes she said, "I will deliver the private letter Mr. Turner left for Mr. Whitmore." I didn't speak. My hands were on the table, still, cold. The skin on my knuckles tightened every time I tried to breathe. I felt the weight of 12 years crash down on the room, on my daughter, and on me. A thick silence covered everything, a silence made of lies that had finally died, and of truths that had, at last, found their way. When the guards closed the door behind Hassan, the sound echoed like a metallic clang inside my head. The room, already thick with tension, suddenly felt even denser, as if the air itself had solidified. No one moved. Even the hum of the air conditioning sounded different, like it was coming from far away. Emily was still in her seat, her hands covering her face. Her shoulders shook with small spasms, and every time she let out a choked sob, the entire room seemed to shrink. The older woman next to her offered a box of tissues, but Emily didn't lift her hands. She just leaned forward, as if the weight of what she'd heard had bent her in half. I wanted to go to her, to say something, to touch her shoulder like I did when she was a little girl, but one of Linda's assistants gave me a quick, discreet, but clear gesture. "Wait." Not yet. I stayed still. I felt my fingers grip the edge of the table without me even realizing it. Linda began to gather some of the documents. Then she looked up and spoke to us in a softer tone. "Before we finish, we must review the addendum regarding senior staff and the company's transition process." No one answered. The few people left in the room just nodded, some without even looking up from the floor. Everyone seemed to be trying to find their footing in the middle of the chaos. Slowly, Emily sat up. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged down her cheeks. I knew she hadn't cried like this in many, many years. She, who had always maintained such a strong, confident, almost impenetrable image, seeing her like this, it tore me apart. "Dad?" she whispered suddenly. "All of this, is it true?" The question came out fragile, broken, as if each word cost her everything. I opened my mouth to answer, but Linda spoke first, perhaps trying to maintain the procedural order. "All the evidence is attached, Emily. Everything said here is backed by Mr. Turner's own documents." Emily closed her eyes as if wanting to disappear for a moment. A man in a gray suit, I think he was the assistant technical director, spoke in a low voice. I suspected something for a long time, but Hassan was too slick. There was no way to confirm it. A young woman in the back murmured, "I've never seen Emily cry at the office." Emily shot up from her seat. The chair made a sharp noise as it slid back. She grabbed a tissue from the table, wiping her face with clumsy, almost desperate movements. Then she looked directly at me. That look held pain, rage, shame, confusion, and something else I couldn't name. Then she turned to Linda. "I want to see everything. Absolutely everything." Linda nodded to her assistant, who opened one of the cardboard boxes and pulled out 2 large binders. He placed them in front of Emily, who immediately began flipping through the pages. Roughly, each page she read seemed to slice away another piece of the reality she thought she knew, until she reached the email where Hassan instructed his employees. "Hide the advance on the funds until further notice." At that, Emily dropped the binders. They hit the table with a dull thud. She stumbled back 2 steps and tripped on the leg of her chair. One of the employees stood up just in time to catch her arm. Emily gasped for air, as if there was none left. He destroyed my family, she suddenly screamed. No one could say anything. Some looked down, others were frozen, stunned by the outburst. Even Linda paused, giving the scream space to fade on its own. Then she spoke, with the calm of someone who has seen this kind of breakdown before. I understand this is extremely difficult, Emily, but we must finish the session's minutes. Emily returned to her seat. Her hands trembled as she pulled the chair in. I fixed my gaze on her fingers. So rigid the knuckles had turned white. A gray-haired manager suddenly stood up. I need to step out for a moment. I need air. Linda allowed him to leave, and as he walked out quickly, almost staggering, the assistants distributed printed copies of the preliminary minutes. Emily took her copy, and as she signed it, the pen slipped out of the signature line. She tried to sign it again, but the second attempt was just as shaky. She ran a hand over her forehead, exhausted. When Linda announced the session was over, everyone began to file out silently, as if they were afraid of breaking something else in that space. No one spoke. No one dared to make eye contact. Emily moved toward the door but stopped right in the frame. She looked at the hallway, then back at the room, as if she didn't know where to go, as if the future in an instant had lost its shape. I remained seated. I didn't want to approach her surrounded by so many people. I didn't want to force her to choose between me and maintaining her facade. So I waited. I kept my hands on the table, breathing slowly. Finally, the room was empty. Just Emily, Linda, and me. Emily turned around. Her gaze fell on me. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything her mouth couldn't. Questions, guilt, fear, a silent plea, and a love that didn't know where to aim. Linda broke the fragile silence. Mr. Whitmore, I still have the personal documents Mr. Turner left specifically for you. I'll get them in a moment. Emily took a step back. She clutched her purse strap as if it were an anchor to keep from crumbling again. Then she spoke in a voice so low that if I hadn't been looking right at her, I might not have heard it. I need time. And without another word, she left the room. She walked quickly down the hall, almost running. I watched her disappear around the corner. I felt a deep ache in my chest. It wasn't just sadness. It was a bitter mix of relief, pain, hope, and something like mourning. Linda closed the binders on the table. When you're ready, Mr. Whitmore, I'll accompany you to the adjoining room. The envelope Mr. Turner left for you is in there. I stood up slowly. I looked at the door my daughter had just walked through. I didn't say a word, but inside me everything was shifting, as if, after 12 years, the real earthquake had finally begun. Linda led me down the hall to a small room 3 doors down from the conference room. The metal plaque on the frame read, Post-State Documentation Room. The place felt like part doctor's office, part audit room. A light wood table, 2 high-backed chairs, a metal file cabinet, and a white light that was too bright for such a quiet room. Linda opened a drawer in the cabinet and pulled out a thick yellow envelope, sealed with clear wax, my name written on it in blue ink. For George Whitmore, private. She placed it in front of me with both hands, as if delivering a fragile object. Mr. Turner wanted you to read this letter completely alone, she explained. He was very insistent on that detail. I just stared at the envelope. I couldn't touch it yet. Then she took a stack of documents from the same box, with a cover sheet that read Transfer of Assets, Immediate Action Required. She put them next to me with precise, almost ceremonial movements. Here are the next steps for the provisional transfer, she said. You will have access to a temporary fund where everything will be deposited while we finalize the legal process. Tomorrow at 10, you will have a meeting with the board to review the details. I nodded without speaking. I felt like the air in this room was heavier than anywhere else in the building. Linda handed me a magnetic key card. With this, you can re-enter the building without needing to register. It's temporary but necessary, considering the situation. She paused for a second before adding, Mr. Turner anticipated there would be opposition from Hassan Carter, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I carefully put the envelope in my bag. I checked the zipper twice. Not sure why. Maybe because I was afraid it would all disappear if I didn't secure it. Linda asked if I needed an escort out of the building. I thanked her, but said no. I'd rather leave alone, I replied. I've spent too many years being watched. When I opened the door to the small room, the murmur of the hallway returned. 3 employees were gathered in a circle, talking in low voices. When they saw me, they fell silent. One of them, a gray-haired man who could have been a colleague in another life, nodded at me with a mixture of respect and remorse. I walked to the elevator. 2 young employees got in with me, trying not to look at me directly. I don't blame them. It must be hard to look someone in the eye when you've believed the worst about them for years. When we reached the lobby, the scene changed. Near the glass doors, 2 security guards were restraining Hassan. He was gesticulating angrily, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled from desperation. I heard him say, "I just want to talk. You can't ban me from entering." One of the guards held up a hand to stop him. "Mr. Carter, you are prohibited from going up. Please leave." In that instant, Hassan saw me. His eyes locked on mine, filled with a fury that seemed to spring from the very center of his wounded pride. He tried to take a step toward me, but the guard stopped him. I didn't stop. I just walked past him, not giving him more than a fraction of a glance. The kind of look you give when you finally leave a monster behind, one that hunted you for years. Outside, Seattle was covered in a fine rain that turned the streetlights into blurry lines. I stood under the awning for a moment, making sure my bag was completely closed. While I waited for the cab I had ordered from the app, I saw Emily across the street. She was under a coworker's umbrella. Her eyes were swollen. Her colleague was saying something to her. Emily just shook her head. Her eyes met mine, but she didn't move, and neither did I. Between us was more than just the physical distance of a crosswalk. There were years of silence, wounds, and wrong decisions. The cab arrived. I got in and said the name of the hotel. The driver, a man in his 50s, put on his seatbelt and turned on the radio. They were talking about the Seattle real estate market. Rising prices, interest rate hikes. Everything sounded so normal, so alien to what had just happened. At the hotel, I walked through the lobby without looking at anyone. The carpet was damp from guest shoes. I went up to my room, closed the door, and leaned my back against it for a moment, breathing slowly. Then I left my bag on the table. I took off my jacket, then my tie. The shirt collar felt a bit tight, as if I was still wearing the weight of that whole meeting. I took out the yellow envelope. I placed it on the table. I ran my fingers over the rough paper, tracing my name over and over. Michael's handwriting was slanted, elegant, just as I remembered it from the reports he signed more than a decade ago. I didn't open it right away. I went to the bathroom, filled a glass with water. Then I dragged a chair to the table, pulled it close, and sat down, all with slow movements, as if every gesture needed preparation. The air conditioner hummed softly, a kind of white noise that seemed part of the silence. I looked at the envelope for a long time. 12 years. 12 years locked inside a single piece of paper. Finally, I put my thumbs on the flap of the envelope, and with a slow movement, I broke the seal. The sound of the paper tearing was too loud in the empty room. I opened the flap. Inside were several sheets of paper, folded precisely. The smell of old paper mixed with the dry hotel air. And, for a moment, just for a moment, I thought that maybe my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I took a deep breath, preparing to read what Michael Turner had written to me. And then, finally, I unfolded the first sheet. I tore the seal on the yellow envelope very carefully, as if I was afraid of breaking something more than just paper. Inside was a sheaf of pages, folded in 2. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed, with gently worn edges, as if someone had reviewed it several times before finally deciding to give it to me. On the first page, I recognized Michael's handwriting, that particular way he had of pressing the pen on the vertical strokes and slanting his accents to the right. However, I noticed something different. In the last words of each line, the ink seemed to waver, as if his hand no longer responded with the firmness it once had. I put the letter on the table. I turned on the lamp, bringing the warm light closer so I could read well. I took a deep breath, and I began, "George, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer in this world." The first line spoke of his illness, of the moment he knew it was terminal, and of the urgency he felt to correct what he had let rot for too long. Michael confessed that for the last few months he had written a different version of this letter every night, unsure if he would ever be able to deliver it. I read slowly. Sometimes I had to go back a line, because the words seemed to weigh too heavily on my eyes. He talked about the trial, about how, while I was sinking, he remained silent, about how he had discovered, too late, that his silence not only ruined my life but also Emily's. When I reached the paragraph dedicated to my daughter, I had to stop. My fingers instinctively closed around the edge of the paper. I watched Hassan mold Emily's every thought, how he separated her from you, making her believe that you had betrayed her. I did not intervene, and that was cowardice. There is no other word for it. I read that sentence several times. I let it sink in. It hurt. But it also explained the years of distance, the evasive glances, the calls that never came, the silences that grew between us like invisible walls. I stared out the hotel window for a moment. The Seattle rain was falling like a thin, constant curtain, as if the city was breathing in long, damp sighs. I returned to the letter. Michael then detailed what he called my final repair, a structured plan with dates, recommendations, key people within the company, and a summary of the projects he considered most important for the future. He didn't just want me to inherit the company, he wanted me to lead it. Every name, every figure, every suggestion came with an explanation. Michael was always meticulous. Even in his farewell, he was still the obsessive architect I once knew. At the end, I found a paragraph underlined in blue ink. George, help her. Help Emily get back the life she deserves. She is not responsible for any of this. I felt a tight knot in my throat. Of all the words in the letter, those were the ones that cut through me the most. Not because it was a request, but because it confirmed something I had known for a long time. Emily was broken inside. Even long before this revelation, I continued reading. On the last page, Michael mentioned the attachments. I looked inside the envelope and sure enough found a smaller secondary envelope marked enclosures. Inside was a red USB drive, still sealed with a security label. 3 audio recordings stored in transparent sleeves. 4 signed photocopies of notarized statements. I placed each item on the table, lining them up. Not really knowing why. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because I needed to bring order to something in this chaos. Then I placed everything in the inner compartment of my bag, making sure to close it with a firm click. I went to the bathroom. I turned on the cold water and washed my face. When I looked up, the mirror was fogged up from the hotel's humidity, and my reflection looked older than my 63 years. Not tired, not defeated, just heavy. As if the truth, even though it was finally the truth, also came with a price. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was a hotel employee. He handed me a white envelope saying it had been left at the reception a few minutes ago. "Any sender?" I asked. "No, sir," he replied. "They just said it was urgent." I closed the door again. I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, written in a hurry. "Mr. Whitmore, I want to talk to you. E." Below it, the address of a small coffee shop in Fremont and a time. 8:30 in the morning. I stared at those initials. E. I didn't need anything else to know it was my daughter. I put the note in the inside pocket of my shirt. Then I went down to the reception and asked for a map of the neighborhood. The receptionist marked it for me with a pen, giving me directions. I went back to my room. I set the alarm on my phone. I did not, under any circumstances, want to be late for this meeting. Before turning off the lights, I took Michael's letter one more time. I folded it carefully, following the exact same original creases, and put it in the zippered pocket of my bag, the same compartment where I always keep what I consider most valuable. I turned off the lamp. I lay back. The sound of the rain hitting the window filled the darkness of the room. And between those sounds, I lay awake for a long time, thinking about the next morning, about the coffee shop in Fremont, about my daughter, and about all the words we had left unsaid for more than a decade. I didn't really sleep that night. It was a night suspended, between what my life had been and what it could possibly become. The alarm went off at 6:45. I didn't remember actually sleeping, more like I had spent the night in a state between broken dreams. And thoughts that kept returning, over and over, to Emily's face as she left the conference room. I picked up the phone, checked if there were any messages from her. Nothing. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, as if that could make something appear. I got up slowly, put on a clean shirt and a wool sweater to protect myself from the damp Seattle cold. I looked in the mirror for a moment before leaving. My eyes were tired but not sad. It was a different kind of tired, the kind that comes when life demands you walk a path you thought was closed. In the hotel lobby, I poured myself a coffee and walked to the bus stop. The number 40 bus arrived fairly on time. I got on, found a seat by the window. The city was just waking up. Workers with backpacks, students yawning, people running on the sidewalk so they wouldn't be late. The world kept spinning, even though mine had completely changed. The Monreese coffee shop was on a quiet corner in Fremont, a small, warm place, with exposed brick walls and a strong aroma of freshly ground espresso. I arrived 15 minutes early. I chose a table near the window where I could see the street. It was drizzling outside, forming small drops that slid down the fogged-up glass. A waitress approached. "Can I get you something, sir?" "A black coffee, please," I replied. I put my bag on the chair next to me and cleaned my glasses with a handkerchief. I couldn't sit still. Every time the shop door opened, my heart gave a small jump. At 8:27, Emily walked in. She was wearing a long, tan coat, her hair up in a messy bun. I saw the slight tremor in her fingers as she closed her umbrella. When she saw me, she froze for a second. Then she started walking toward me with slow, almost fearful steps, as if she were approaching a part of her life she had buried by mistake. She sat down across from me. She didn't say hello. She didn't comment on the weather. Her breathing was short, tense. The waitress came over, and Emily ordered a hot latte. Then she picked up the water glass from the center of the table and turned it between her fingers, trying to maintain control. 20 seconds of silence passed, but they were long, almost uncomfortable. The kind of silence that only exists between two people who have loved and hurt each other at the same time. Emily was the first to speak. "Last night," she said, taking a deep breath. "I read everything, every document, every email, every statement." I nodded. I didn't want to interrupt her. She opened her bag and pulled out a wrinkled stack of papers, the same ones she had gathered after the will reading. She put them on the table, pushing them toward me. "I don't even know where to begin," she murmured. The waitress returned with the latte, setting it down gently. Emily said thank you, almost in a whisper. A tear slid down her cheek, and she immediately wiped it away with a napkin. An older couple, sitting near the door, glanced our way, but quickly turned back, pretending not to hear. Emily looked down. "Dad, why didn't you try to explain? Why did you let me believe all those things for 12 years? I swallowed hard. The question hit me right in the chest. I was about to answer when she continued, as if afraid the silence would give me a chance to escape. "Hassan told me you were obsessed with power, that you wanted to destroy my marriage, that you were jealous of him." Emily let out a bitter laugh, almost a broken sigh. And I believed him. She stared at her cup, touching the white foam with the tip of a spoon. Every movement was slow, measured, as if she were afraid of breaking something else. A customer opened the door. The bell jingled, and then the shop returned to its soft, quiet hum. Emily breathed deeply. "Dad," she said, without looking up, "I said terrible things at that trial. I screamed at you in front of everyone. I wouldn't listen to you, not once. Emily, and still, you never blamed me," she whispered. Another tear rolled down. I handed her a napkin, and this time she took it. Then she looked up at me, and what I saw there was a painful mix of guilt and fear. "Dad, are you angry with me?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because the words seemed too small for what she needed. I pushed the napkin a little closer to her. No pressure, no reproach. Emily pressed her lips together. "Michael wrote in his letter that you loved me more than anything," she whispered. "That you always did." The barista put on a soft playlist. Guitar notes filled the background, mixing with the smell of coffee and my daughter's broken breathing. Emily inhaled deeply again. I don't know how to get back everything we lost. I don't know how to start over." Just then, a customer spilled some water as she passed. The waitress hurried over to clean it up. The sound of the rag on the floor was a strange noise in the middle of our conversation, a reminder that life goes on, even when we run out of words. Emily looked at me with a fragility I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. "Dad, do you still want to talk to me?" I nodded without hesitation. Her body relaxed. Just a little. Not enough to smile, but enough to let a little air into her lungs. I felt that, for an instant, the Emily from long ago, the one who used to run to me after scraping her knee, was returning through this adult woman, crying silently in front of me. The conversation continued for almost an hour. Questions, long silences, held back tears. And several times, the feeling of walking on a bridge we were just beginning to rebuild. We didn't solve everything. That wasn't possible in one morning. But for the first time in 12 years, we talked like a father and a daughter. And that, for me, was already a beginning. When we left Monreese Coffee, the drizzle was still falling, like a fine veil covering the whole Fremont neighborhood. Emily opened her umbrella and tilted it to cover me too. Though the edge barely managed to protect us, we walked slowly along the wet sidewalk, hearing the car tires cut through the water on the street, and the drops hitting the plastic of the umbrella with a soft, almost hypnotic rhythm. We didn't talk much on that walk. After everything we had said inside the cafe, every step seemed like a silent continuation of that delicate conversation. When we reached the parking lot, Emily stopped next to her silver sedan. She opened the door, rested her hand on the car's edge, and before getting in, she looked at me directly for the first time since we left the shop. "Dad," she said quietly, "I need to see you again in a few days. I have a lot of things to sort out." I nodded without pressing her. Her voice had a tremor that wasn't from the cold. The car's red taillights lit up as she started the engine. I watched her drive away through the rain, the car's shape disappearing between the dark trees and the shadows of the buildings. I stood there for a few seconds, breathing in the damp air, letting the moment settle inside me, like a weight that was both warm and painful. I took the bus back to the hotel. I sat by the window as the city moved at full speed around us. Workers, cyclists, cabs passing quickly. A daily choreography I had forgotten since I left Seattle. The glass was fogged up. I drew a small circle with my finger, just to see the landscape open up a little, as if I wanted to see the path ahead more clearly. When I got to the room, the first thing I did was take off my wet jacket and check my emails on the old laptop. There was one from Linda with the subject line, "Meeting with the Executive Committee, 10 a.m. tomorrow." I felt a jolt in my stomach, not from fear, but from the scale of the responsibility I was about to assume. I went down to the lobby and asked the receptionist where I could buy a decent suit. She smiled kindly and gave me the address of a store downtown. I walked for almost 20 minutes in the rain, until I reached a storefront filled with warm lights and impeccably dressed mannequins. The smell of new fabric greeted me as I entered. I tried on 3 different suits. The first one was too big in the shoulders, the second too tight, the third dark gray, simple, firm. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for a moment, I didn't know if the man I saw looked more like the George from before prison, or like someone completely new. The salesman adjusted the sleeves and measured my shoulders while explaining the fabric, but I was only thinking about the next day's meeting, how I would walk into that room, how they would look at me. I took the suit, hung it in the room, and sat on the bed for a while, just looking at it, like someone looking at a door to another life. The next morning, I arrived at the Turner Building half an hour early. The sky was gray and the air was cold, but I felt a different energy as I walked through those revolving doors. The security guard greeted me with respect, something that hadn't happened in over a decade. The receptionist saw me and said, "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. They're waiting for you." She led me to the elevator that went to the 23rd floor. When I entered the boardroom, almost all the executives were already seated. Serious faces, some tense. A couple stood up to greet me. Others just looked up with that hard-to-read expression, somewhere between shame, doubt, and surprise. Linda was reviewing documents at the head of the table. She saw me and smiled with the professional seriousness that characterized her. "This is Mr. George Whitmore," she announced. "As of today, he is the new owner of Turner Construction, according to Mr. Turner's will." There was a subtle shift in the room, as if everyone inhaled at the same time. An operations director immediately raised his hand. "Do you intend to sell the company?" "No," I replied bluntly. The CFO, with thick glasses and a cautious voice, added, "Then, how do you plan to run the company?" I opened it and placed it on the table. "I will follow the plan he designed himself," I said. "Here are his instructions, his signatures, and those of the witnesses." There was a soft murmur. Some directors exchanged glances. Others leaned in to get a better look at the documents. Then began a barrage of reports. Debts from the Tecum project, new teams without enough experience, public works delays due to lack of funds. They spoke one by one, without holding back, as if they could finally tell the truth. I listened to it all calmly, and when they finished, I just said, "From now on, this company will be completely transparent. No more favors, no more under-the-table deals, no more hiding mistakes." A female area director, a woman in her 50s, nodded with relief, as if she had been waiting for years for someone to say those words. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. When I finally left, the hallway was more crowded than before. 2 young employees were murmuring to each other, and I overheard, "Is that Whitmore? The man Turner trusted until the end?" I didn't stop, but their words followed me to the elevator. The rest of the day I walked along the shore of South Lake Union, letting the cold wind clear my thoughts. The lake water was dark, moving with small ripples that broke against the dock. I stood there for a while, just breathing. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Emily. "Dad, are you free tonight? I'd like to talk more." I stared at that message for several seconds. Then I replied, "Yes, tell me where." I chose a family restaurant in Capitol Hill, a warm, simple place that reminded me of the dinners we used to have when she was a teenager. Emily arrived a few minutes later. She looked tired, but calmer than the day before. During dinner, she told me more things she hadn't wanted to say before. How Hassan had controlled her money, how he checked her schedule, how he called her every 2 hours when she was at the office. She said it without drama, but with a tone that revealed how much she had kept inside. "Do you want to get out of all this, Emily?" I finally asked. She looked down and nodded. Just a small movement, but full of meaning. "I want to start over," she whispered. I then told her about Michael's last words for me, his wish for me to help her get her life back. Emily took a deep breath, as if that sentence was holding her up from the inside. The dinner ended around 9. When we stood up, she shook my hand. Not a hug, not a dramatic gesture, just a trembling hand seeking to steady itself in mine. "Thanks, Dad," she said before leaving. I walked back to the hotel slowly, with a strange warmth in my chest. That night, I printed out a list of all the positions in the compliance and administrative support department. I thought about what would be the best place for Emily to start, from scratch, but supported. I put the list in my bag, and for the first time in a long time I fell asleep with the feeling that something, however fragile, was being born again. The next morning I arrived at the Turner Building with the list of jobs folded in my hand. I put it in the inside pocket of my new jacket, trying to stay calm. The sky was overcast, as it almost always is in Seattle, and the damp air clung to my skin. I entered the lobby and nodded to the guard, who this time returned a respectful good morning. I was surprised by the effect that simple gesture had on me. Somewhere, deep down, I felt like my life was finally secking to be a shadow. Linda was already waiting for me in the small meeting room on the 21st floor. She had several documents stacked, a metal pen, and her usual firm expression. She offered me a seat and passed me the folders one by one. Bank authorizations, transfer forms, initial audit reports. I signed everything, unhurried but decisive. Each signature seemed to close one chapter of my past and open another I didn't know how to handle yet. When we finished, I took a deep breath before speaking. "Linda, I'd like to have a private meeting with Emily about her job here." Linda nodded immediately. She took out her phone and typed a quick message. Not even 5 minutes passed before the door opened and Emily walked in. Her face was tired, with soft, dark circles under her eyes. But there was something new in her posture, a quiet determination, a decision made after a long night of reflection. She was no longer the devastated woman from the day before. "Hi, Dad," she said as she sat down. I returned the greeting with a nod. I opened my folder and slid the list of positions I had printed last night across the table. She took it and began to read in silence. Project Assistant, Technical Support, General Administrative. Her eyes moved quickly down each line. Finally, she looked up. Which one do you want me to do? I pointed to a specific line. Administrative Support, Compliance Department. Emily took a deep breath, looked down, and nodded slowly. I accept. Linda intervened with her professional tone. The duties for this position include organizing files, receiving irregularity reports, logging incidents, and preparing weekly reports. It's a technical, detailed job, and, well, very different from the previous role you held. Emily bit her lip for a moment. Am I going to be sitting next to people who used to be on my team? Yes, I replied, without softening it. She needed the truth, not empty comfort. Emily gripped the handles of her purse, then looked at me with a mixture of nerves and humility I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Okay, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I can do it. Linda stood up and called Human Resources. A few minutes later, a young assistant came in with a blue folder and placed it in front of Emily. It was a standard job application form. Watching my daughter, who once signed approvals for hundreds of thousands of dollars, fill in her address, her social security number, and her work history. It struck a chord I thought was dead. I watched her erase something, correct a letter, double-check a number. It was a simple act, but in the quiet of that office, it felt like a clumsy, painful rebirth. When she finished, she handed over the papers with slightly trembling hands. Linda signed them and sent an email to IT to activate a temporary pass. 10 minutes later, a bald man with glasses arrived with a white card on a blue lanyard. Here you go, Emily, he said before leaving. Emily put the card around her neck, a small gesture, but it meant so much more than it looked. I walked with my daughter to the 8th floor where the compliance department was located. When the elevator doors opened, a smell of old coffee and file paper greeted us. The walls were covered in corkboards with yellow sticky notes, and the sound of keyboards filled the air. Clara, the department head, stood up when she saw us. She was a woman in her 50s, with a kind but firm expression. Emily, she said sincerely, I know what's happened, and I know this isn't easy. We're going to start from scratch. Emily nodded, her eyes lowered but grateful. Clara showed her to her desk, a cubicle in the corner, with an old computer that made a faint humming noise when it turned on. There was a pile of unprocessed folders, a pack of sticky notes, and a pen someone had left behind. It was the complete opposite of the large office Emily used to occupy on the executive floor. I heard 2 employees murmur from a nearby cubicle. Is that Emily Carter? Yeah, looks like she's starting as an assistant. Unbelievable. Emily heard the whispers. I noticed it in the way her shoulders tensed for a second. But she didn't react. She just adjusted her chair, took a deep breath, and opened the first folder. I walked up to the glass of the small office and tapped lightly to get her attention. She looked up. I gave her a simple gesture. I'll see you later. Emily responded with a faint, almost imperceptible nod. But it was full of meaning. I left and went back to the elevator. When the doors closed, I saw my reflection in the polished steel. My new suit. My straighter posture. My eyes, less heavy than a few days ago. I looked like a different man. Or maybe the same man as before, but finally beginning to get back something I had lost. My phone vibrated. It was a reminder from Linda for the 2 p.m. strategy meeting. I put the phone away and left the building. Under the portico, I looked up at the gray sky, preparing for another rain. I opened my bag and reviewed the to-do list I had written by hand. Complete internal audit. Restructure old projects. Prepare transparent financial reports. Review ongoing contracts. There was so much to do, the list seemed endless, but for the first time in 12 years, instead of fear, I felt direction. I walked along the crowded sidewalk. Cars passing, a cyclist dodging puddles, a street vendor shouting prices for umbrellas. Life went on, indifferent to my battles, and yet, inside me, something was settling. It wasn't peace, it wasn't joy, but it was a path. As I moved through the crowd, I thought about Emily, sitting in that small cubicle, opening her first folder as an assistant. Starting from the bottom, with humility and a strength that few people knew she had, for the first time in many years. I felt that both of us, she and I, were walking forward. Not together, not yet, but in the same direction. And that, after everything, was a beginning. A difficult beginning, a fragile beginning, but a real one.